My name is Abby Turner. I'm 32 years old, and 18 months ago, my husband of 7 years packed a single suitcase on a Tuesday afternoon and told me he had fallen in love with someone else. Not a stranger. My best friend from college, the woman who had been in my wedding, who had held my hand in the hospital when our daughter was born, who still had a key to our apartment. He didn't ask for the key back, he just left. Within 3 weeks, I was sitting on the floor of a studio apartment in a part of town I'd never lived in before, surrounded by boxes I hadn't finished unpacking, listening to my 4-year-old daughter ask me for the fourth time that day where Daddy was. I kept telling her he was busy. I kept telling myself it was going to be fine. Neither of us believed it. The divorce was fast because there wasn't much to divide. The savings account had less than $800 in it by the time everything cleared. My name wasn't on the lease of our old place. My car needed new brakes, and I kept putting it off. My daughter's preschool tuition was due the 15th of every month without exception, and the part-time receptionist job I'd held for 3 years at a dental office suddenly felt like it was held together with tape and goodwill. I started applying for second jobs in February: retail, delivery, a restaurant that never called back. Then one evening, I was scrolling through a job board while my daughter slept, and I saw a listing that stopped me mid-scroll. Live-in personal assistant and companion care, private residence, competitive salary plus housing, immediate start, serious applicants only. I read it 3 times. The salary listed was more than I made in 3 months at the dental office. Housing included meant I could stop draining my account on rent. The work description was vague: managing daily schedules, light household coordination, companionship for the homeowner, who was described only as a retired businessman in his 70s recovering from a period of significant personal difficulty. I Googled what that phrase usually meant in caregiver listings. The results were not encouraging. It covered everything from grief to addiction to early dementia. I sat with that for a moment. Then I thought about the 15th of the month. I applied that same night. 2 days later, a woman called me. She had a smooth, measured voice, the kind people develop when they've spent years being taken seriously in rooms that didn't originally want them there. She introduced herself as the homeowner's daughter and said she'd reviewed my application and wanted to meet. The house was in a gated neighborhood about 40 minutes north of the city. I almost missed the entrance because the gate didn't look like a gate. It looked like a garden wall. The driveway was long and lined with old oak trees, and the house at the end of it was the kind of place you see in magazines that feature the word estate in the headline. A woman opened the door before I finished knocking. She was maybe 40, dressed like someone who had never once bought something on sale, and she smiled at me the way people smile when they've already decided something but want to seem open-minded. She told me her name was Diane. She said her father's name was Mr. Calloway. She said he had been through a difficult year and that his behavior had become, in her words, unpredictable and disruptive. How unpredictable? I asked. Most people who've tried this position lasted under a week. She said it calmly, like she was telling me the weather. He refuses schedules. He shouts. He's dismissed 4 companions in the past 3 months. 2 of them quit by the second day. I thought about my daughter's backpack hanging by the door of the studio apartment, her name written on the tag in my handwriting. I'm not most people, I said. Diane studied me for a moment, then nodded once and led me inside. Mr. Calloway's room was at the end of a long hallway on the ground floor. Diane opened the door slowly, like she was used to bracing herself. The man inside was sitting in a leather chair by the window with his back mostly to us. He was tall, even-seated, broad-shouldered, the kind of frame that made it clear he'd once taken up a lot of space in a room and had not entirely forgotten how. The moment he heard us, he turned. "Who's this?" he said. Not a greeting, a demand. "Her name is Abby," Diane said. "She's going to be helping you for a while." "I don't need help," he said. "I've said that. Repeatedly." "I know," I said. He looked at me directly for the first time. "Then why are you here?" "Because I need this job," I said, "and because you clearly need someone who isn't afraid of you." There was a pause. He turned back to the window. Diane exhaled like something small had been accomplished. She spent the next 20 minutes walking me through the medication schedule, the meal preferences, the routines he refused to follow but that she tried to maintain anyway. Then she showed me to the room I'd be staying in, second floor, small but clean, with a window that looked out over the back garden. Before she left, she turned in the doorway. "You have a daughter," she said. It wasn't a question. She'd seen it in my application. "I do. She's 4. She stays with my mother on weekdays and I'll see her on weekends." Diane nodded. "Good. That makes things simpler." Then she was gone. I stood in that room for a moment after she left. I thought about my daughter's face when I dropped her off that morning. She'd waved from my mother's porch with her whole arm, the way little kids do, like they're trying to be seen from a great distance. I pressed my hand flat against the window glass and told myself I was doing this for her. I was doing this because she deserved her preschool and her backpack with her name on it and a mother who wasn't drowning. Then I went downstairs and started the job. The first week was hard in ways I had expected and hard in ways I hadn't. Mr. Calloway shouted at me twice on the first day. He knocked a glass off the side table on purpose and then watched to see what I would do. I picked it up. He threw a paperback book at the wall the morning of day 2. I picked that up too and put it back on the shelf without saying anything. By the third day, he had stopped throwing things, though he still hadn't said anything that could be called a conversation. On the fourth day, he asked me what I was reading. I had a novel with me that I brought out during quiet hours. I told him the title. He made a sound that might have been disdain and might have been interest. The next morning, the book was on the kitchen table. He'd clearly gone through it while I was asleep. "The ending is wrong," he said when I came in. "I haven't finished it yet," I said. "The ending is still wrong," he said. That was how it started. Meanwhile, the house had its own rhythms that I was still learning. Diane came by every few days, always announced, always dressed impeccably, always carrying the particular energy of someone checking on an investment rather than visiting a father. She asked me questions that sounded like casual conversation, but weren't whether her father had said anything about his lawyers, whether he'd asked about any of his business contacts, whether he'd made any phone calls she should know about. I answered honestly, which meant I answered vaguely, because the truth was he mostly talked to me about books and weather and occasionally the garden. Then, on a Thursday night in my second week, everything changed. I had come downstairs for a glass of water. It was close to 10 o'clock. The house was quiet and dark except for the light coming from under the door of the sitting room at the far end of the main hall. I heard voices inside. Diane's voice. And another one. A man's voice. One I recognized before my brain had fully processed why. I stopped walking. The voice was saying something low and amused, and the laugh that followed it was the particular kind of laugh I had spent 7 years listening to across a kitchen table. A laugh I had once thought meant warmth and now knew meant self-satisfaction. I pushed the door open. My ex-husband was standing near the fireplace with a glass of bourbon in his hand. He was wearing a jacket I didn't recognize. He looked comfortable. He looked like someone who belonged there. He saw me, and his expression moved through surprise and into something else. Something slow and pleased, the way a cat looks when it realizes it has cornered something smaller than itself. "Well," he said, "I did not see that coming." My throat closed. I couldn't speak for a moment. Diane looked between the two of us with a slight frown. "You know each other?" "We were married," my ex-husband said, still looking at me. "For 7 years. He tilted his head. "She didn't mention that in her application?" "It wasn't relevant," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. He smiled. "No, I suppose it wasn't." He took a slow sip of his drink. "So this is what you landed on." "Caretaker." "Companion," I said. "Sure." He glanced around the room. "Funny, isn't it? You taking care of Diane's father, in our house." He gestured broadly at the space around us. "Well, my house now, I suppose. Or it will be." I looked at Diane. Something flickered across her face. Not quite guilt, more like mild inconvenience. "You should have disclosed the connection," she said to me flatly. I didn't know there was one, I said, which was the truth. My ex-husband was watching me with that same half smile. He'd always enjoyed this, the moment when someone realized the board had shifted and he already knew where all the pieces were. Don't worry, he said. I won't have you removed. Someone has to manage the old man. He finished his drink and set it on the mantel. Good night, Abby. Try to get some sleep. He left the room. Diane watched him go, then looked at me with the same measured expression she wore for everything. We'll discuss this tomorrow, she said. She didn't. The next day came and went, and the subjects never came up again. I lay awake that night for a long time. I thought about leaving. I built the whole scenario out in my mind, packing my bag, calling a car, texting my mother to say I was coming. I thought about how free it would feel for about 11 minutes. And then I thought about my daughter's preschool and the studio apartment and the $800. And I stopped building the scenario. I stayed. Over the following days, I began to understand the shape of the situation more clearly. My ex-husband was not visiting out of affection for Diane's father. He was there regularly, and every time he came, he and Diane spent long stretches of time in the sitting room or the study with the door closed. Mr. Calloway never asked about these meetings. He seemed, on the days after they happened, more agitated than usual. Then one morning, 2 men arrived with medical bags. I recognized the body language, the careful, deferential efficiency of doctors making a house call that isn't entirely about the patient. They went into Mr. Calloway's room with Diane and stayed for 45 minutes. Afterward, the medication cabinet in his room had been restocked. By the afternoon, Mr. Calloway was worse. Not worse the way people get when they're tired or in pain. Worse in a specific strange way. Confused in the middle of sentences he had started clearly, agitated at sounds I couldn't hear. Convinced for an hour that there was something wrong with the window, that someone had done something to it. I sat with him through it. I didn't push back on what he was experiencing. I just stayed close and kept my voice quiet and made sure he ate something and drank water, and eventually he settled into sleep. Lying in my room that night, I couldn't stop thinking about the timing. The doctors had come, the medications had been changed, and within hours, a man who had been steadily, quietly improving for 2 weeks had come completely undone. I didn't say anything yet. I didn't know what I was looking at. 3 nights later, I found out. I was passing the study on my way to the kitchen when I heard Diane's voice through the door. The door wasn't fully latched. I wasn't trying to listen. I was trying to walk past, but I heard my ex-husband's voice say her name, and then I heard him say the dosage, and something in my body made me stop. He's getting more erratic, Diane said. She sounded satisfied. How much longer? My ex-husband asked. The doctors think maybe a month, if we stay consistent. Once he starts showing the right patterns in front of the board, the case writes itself. A pause. And the estate? Everything, Diane said. All of it. The accounts, the properties, the holdings. If he's declared incompetent, control transfers to me as next of kin. We've already reviewed the documents. My ex-husband laughed. It was the same laugh from the sitting room. I had heard it 1,000 times in other contexts, and I had never truly heard it until right then. I made myself walk quietly to the kitchen. I poured the glass of water. I walked back upstairs. I sat on the edge of my bed and I tried to think. In the morning, something happened that I hadn't expected. Mr. Calloway was already awake when I came in with his breakfast. He was sitting up straight in his chair, and when I set the tray down, he looked at me with eyes that were clear and direct and completely present. "Sit down," he said. I sat. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "They're changing my medication." "I know," I said carefully. "The things that have been happening to me." He stopped, pressed his mouth together. "It doesn't feel like me. It feels like something is being done to me." I looked at him. I thought about every answer I could give that would be safe. I thought about my job and my daughter's preschool and the $800. And then I thought about the way he had looked the previous afternoon, genuinely frightened by a window, convinced that something was wrong that I couldn't see. I thought about how it felt to be afraid of something you couldn't name. I heard them talking, I said. 2 nights ago, your daughter and I stopped, and someone she's working with. Mr. Calloway didn't move. They're trying to establish that you're incompetent, I said. The medication isn't right. I think it's been changed specifically to make things worse. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then he closed his eyes. When he opened them, his expression had changed into something I didn't have a word for, a kind of grief that had run out of room to move. He told me he had built the company from nothing, that he had signed the papers to create the trust himself 30 years ago, that he had always believed the people he loved would take care of it after him, that he had been wrong about who those people were. His voice didn't shake. That was almost harder to watch than if it had. I'm not leaving you alone in this, I said. It surprised me when I said it. It surprised both of us. He looked at me steadily. Why not? You could walk us that door right now. You have every reason to. I have a 4-year-old, I said. She watches everything I do, and I'd like to be someone she's proud of someday. Something shifted in his face. He didn't say anything, but he nodded, slowly, once. That night we made a plan. The first thing I did was contact a doctor I trusted, my own physician outside the house, who I'd seen twice a year since I was in my 20s. I described what I was seeing without naming anyone and asked him to help me understand what kind of medication could produce those specific symptoms. He asked me careful questions. After 30 minutes, he told me what to look for. The next morning, I checked the medication cabinet while Mr. Calloway kept the housekeeper busy in the other room. I took photos of the labels. I sent them to my doctor. Within a few hours, he confirmed what I had suspected. The dosage on 2 of the bottles was significantly higher than any therapeutic level for a man Mr. Calloway's age and weight. One of the medications wasn't something he should have been taking at all, given his other prescriptions. We stopped the harmful ones quietly. My doctor helped me identify the correct replacements sourced through a pharmacy on the other side of the city with a cash payment and no connection to the house. I administered them myself, carefully, on the schedule my doctor provided. For the first week, I wasn't sure it was working. Mr. Calloway was careful not to show improvement when Diane was present, which required a kind of discipline I wasn't certain he could maintain. But he did. When Diane came by, he was convincingly worse, slower, more confused, occasionally erupting in frustration at nothing. She left each visit looking pleased. Sometimes my ex-husband was with her, and he would glance at me with the slightly superior expression of a man who had never imagined he was being outmaneuvered. Behind closed doors, Mr. Calloway was reading again. He was making calls, quietly and carefully, to a law firm that had represented him years before Diane had steered him toward different counsel. He was steady and deliberate and thorough, the way people are when they have been frightened and then stopped being frightened and have decided to act. Weeks passed. I drove to my mother's house every Saturday morning and picked up my daughter, and we spent the day together. The park, the library, once a children's museum 2 towns over, where she spent 45 minutes in the dinosaur room and didn't want to leave. I didn't tell her anything about what was happening. I just held her hand and watched her and thought about why I was doing what I was doing. 6 weeks after we started the plan, Diane called a meeting. She sent a formal notice to the estate's board members, the family attorneys, and 2 physicians, both selected by her. The purpose of the meeting, as stated in the notice, was to assess Mr. Calloway's mental fitness to continue managing his own affairs and to begin the process of transferring estate authority. The morning of the meeting, I helped Mr. Calloway get dressed. He was calm. He asked me to hand him his watch, a simple one, the kind that doesn't advertise itself, and he put it on carefully and looked at himself in the mirror for a moment. "Ready?" I asked. "I've been ready for 6 weeks," he said. The living room had been arranged with a long table. Board members sat on one side. The 2 physicians Diane had brought were at one end. The attorneys were along the wall. My ex-husband sat beside Diane at the head of the table, looking like a man who had already spent the prize money. I pushed Mr. Calloway's wheelchair to his position at the table and stood behind him. Diane spoke first. Her presentation was polished. She had clearly practiced it. She described her father's deterioration over recent months, with the language of a concerned daughter and the precision of someone who had consulted a lawyer before choosing every word. She referenced the physician assessments, which documented the confusion and agitation and erratic behavior that she herself had largely engineered. She spoke about the estate's needs and her commitment to protecting her father's legacy. She was very good. My ex-husband sat beside her with his hands folded on the table and said nothing. He didn't need to. He was there to witness. One of the board members asked whether Mr. Calloway had been given the opportunity to speak. Diane smiled graciously and gestured toward her father. Mr. Calloway straightened in his wheelchair. When he spoke, his voice was even and unhurried. He thanked the board for their time. He said he was aware of the purpose of the meeting. He said he had spent the past several weeks in consultation with counsel. He named the firm, whose senior partner happened to be in the room, having received an invitation that bypassed Diane entirely, and that he wanted to enter several items into the record before proceeding. Diane's expression shifted, subtly, but I saw it. The first item was a forensic pharmacy analysis of the medications that had been administered to him over the previous 8 weeks. A second attorney entered the report into the record. The analysis documented the intentional elevation of dosages beyond safe therapeutic ranges, consistent with a pattern of deliberate cognitive impairment. One of the physicians Diane had brought cleared his throat. The second item was a series of audio recordings. Mr. Calloway had authorized their capture after a conversation, small devices placed in the sitting room and the study, in locations that were legal under the state's single-party consent laws. The recordings documented, in Diane's own voice and my ex-husband's, the explicit plan to manipulate his medical presentation in order to seize the estate. The room was very quiet. My ex-husband's hands unfolded from the table. Diane said something sharp and high, a denial, fragmented, not quite a sentence. The senior partner spoke for a moment about the specific statutes that had been violated and the process that would follow. He said the words elder financial abuse with the careful deliberateness of a man who knows exactly what they mean legally. Police officers who had arrived 10 minutes earlier and waited in the entryway at Mr. Calloway's prior arrangement entered the room. I watched my ex-husband's face in the moment he understood what was happening. The particular, satisfying sequence of expressions, the disbelief, the rapid recalculation. The moment when recalculation failed. Diane was crying now. She kept saying she'd only wanted to protect him. Mr. Calloway looked at her for a long moment and said, quietly, that she should have wanted that long before she started trying to take from him. Then the officers escorted them both out. The room was very still after they left. Someone coughed. A board member shuffled papers. The senior partner began speaking in low tones to his colleagues. Mr. Calloway turned his wheelchair toward me. He said that he had already updated his estate documents 2 weeks prior, in consultation with his legal team, with instructions that were to be disclosed after the outcome of the meeting was clear. He asked the senior partner to read the relevant section. I heard my name. I heard a figure. I heard the room react around me in slow motion. The intake of breath, the murmur, the way sound becomes slightly unreal when something is happening that you hadn't allowed yourself to imagine. The senior partner set down the document and looked at me and said in plain language that Mr. Calloway had directed a significant portion of his estate, funds held in a separate trust, structured specifically to be independent of any challenge, to me, in recognition of care rendered and loyalty demonstrated when it would have been easier to walk away. I didn't say anything for a moment. Mr. Calloway was watching me. You said your daughter watches everything you do, he said. I want her to see this. I thought about my 4-year-old in my mother's kitchen. I thought about her backpack with her name on it. I thought about every morning I had driven away from her because I had to and promised myself it was going to be worth it. I had to press my hands together to keep them from shaking. Thank you, I said. It came out barely above a whisper. He nodded. Thank you, he said, for not running. As for my ex-husband, he was charged on multiple counts related to the fraud scheme and as part of the legal proceedings that followed, The family court revisited the original custody and child support arrangement. His financial circumstances were now a matter of public record. He was ordered to pay back support and ongoing contributions for our daughter, enforced through wage garnishment, tied to whatever employment he could find. He didn't call. I didn't expect him to. My daughter started kindergarten in the fall, at a school with a garden and a music room and a teacher who remembered every student's name at the end of the first week. On her first day, she wore a dress she had picked out herself and carried a backpack that was almost as big as she was, and she marched through the front door without looking back. I stood on the sidewalk and watched her go and thought, that's why. Not the money, not the ending I hadn't seen coming, not any of it, just that. Her walking through a door without fear. I'd come into that house with nothing except the stubborn, unremarkable determination not to fail my kid. I hadn't set out to save anyone. I hadn't been brave in any dramatic way. I had just kept showing up when it would have been easier not to. But sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that's the whole thing. I keep thinking about that moment when I almost left. Not the big dramatic moment in front of the board, the quiet one. The one at 11 o'clock at night in a small bedroom on the second floor, with my shoes still on and my hand on the zipper of my bag. Nobody saw that moment. Nobody will ever make a story out of it. That was the real one. That was when everything was actually decided. I didn't stay because I was brave. I want to be honest about that. I stayed because I did the math, and the math said I couldn't afford to go. And I think that's worth saying out loud because I spent a long time feeling like survival instincts weren't noble enough to count as a real choice. But they are, choosing to stay when it costs you something, even when the reason is just your kid's tuition and a bag with her name on the tag. That's still a choice, and choices have weight. They add up. What I learned from Mr. Calloway isn't what I expected to learn. I thought this was going to be a story about endurance, about gritting your teeth and getting through. And it was that, partly. But it was also something else. It was about paying attention when something feels wrong. When I heard that conversation through the study door, every reasonable, self-protective part of me said to walk to the kitchen, get the water, go back upstairs, and stay out of it. And I almost did. But something else. Call it conscience. Call it stubbornness. Call it the version of yourself that you're quietly building every day, whether you notice it or not. Wouldn't let me pretend I hadn't heard it. That's the part I want my daughter to understand someday. Not the inheritance, not the outcome. The part where you have information that matters and you have to decide whether you're the kind of person who acts on it. Your character isn't built in the big public moments. It's built in the ones where no one is watching and you do the right thing anyway. And I'll say this too, clear thinking saved us, not luck, not connections. Mr. Calloway had both of those things taken from him systematically, and what remained, once we got the right medication back into his system, was a mind that could assess a situation, make a plan, and execute it without panic. I think about that a lot. The people who tried to harm him did it by clouding his thinking first, because they knew that was the most dangerous thing about him. Intelligence isn't arrogance. It's the capacity to see clearly under pressure and act on what you see. That's worth protecting in yourself. It's worth building deliberately. The last thing I'll say is this. My daughter walked into kindergarten without looking back, and I stood on that sidewalk and thought, that confidence didn't come from money. It didn't come from a house or a trust fund or a good outcome. It came from watching her mother not quit. Children absorb everything. They're watching you decide what kind of person you are in real time every single day. That's not pressure. That's the whole point. I didn't set out to save anyone. I set out to make rent. But I kept showing up, I kept thinking, and I refused to look away when it mattered. The rest followed. It doesn't always work that way, I know that. But I also know it can't work any other way if you're not willing to start there.